For them to keep the wife at bay.
Well, we'll also get into I'm going to find out from all of you how these names are pronounced because I thought it was femur or is it femur? But we'll find out now that we are live. I believe we should be live. So welcome everyone. Welcome everyone in the chat and welcome particularly to my guests on this channel. Thank you so much for joining us. This is For the Love of Comics, and I am very excited, perhaps a little too excited, so I'll be coffeeed up for the first few minutes or so. Very excited to have on this channel a wonderful, wonderful panel of guests, all of whom I've known for many years now on YouTube. And this is the first time that I have guests live on this channel, and I couldn't really ask for a better bunch of people over here. We will go around and do introductions real quick, but this is just for anyone who is joining us now or watching the recording later. We have today what is promising to be quite a meaty and a little bit of a all-encompassing conversation about a terrific, well, I'm not going to start with the judgment calls, but with a very well-known and well-regarded comic book series, Strangers in Paradise by Terry Moore. And we will talk a little bit about the first half of the series, which is what we have all read. But before we go any further, I'd love for my guests to introduce themselves very quickly, say who they are, where you can find them, and then we'll go around and talk a little bit about our familiarity with the book, and then we'll jump into it. So from who I can see on the screen, Gore Vidal, why don't you get us started?
Hello, everybody, and thank you for having me, you guys. Yeah, it's Gore Vidal, and I've been doing this for a few years. You can find me at gorevidal.comics, and I also have a booktube channel, Libro Paradiso. And yeah, and I'm based here in Texas.
Thank you. Highland G?
I'm Highland G. I'm mostly on YouTube, either making videos about books that I've read or doing streams with you guys. So yeah, that's mostly me just on YouTube.
Black Paul?
Yeah, I'm Black Pole. I don't have a YouTube channel anymore. I used to be part of the comic board. If you're looking for me on any social, the only social media I've got is Blue Sky, and I'm Sci-Fi Geek on Blue Sky, so you can find me out there. Otherwise, just thank you for the Love of Comics for hosting this. So great to be with all of you at once. I've been with all of you at some point except for Gore. And we've had some correspondences. You've sent me books. I've sent you some books. So it's good to finally be with you live and in person. And good. It's been a couple years since I've been online with Damien. So it's really nice to be back with you as well. So I'm really looking forward to this. I will spoil it by saying this is one of my top 2 favorite series of all time. So I am head and shoulders so excited to be here and to reread this series. So yeah, thank you guys.
Thank you. And last but not least, Sleepy Reader, Damien.
Hello. Yeah, I'm Sleepy Reader, aka Damien. I've had a YouTube channel about comics for a long time. I think Gore's not that far behind me. He said a few years, but it might be a dozen or a little more. I'm heading in April. It will be my 14th anniversary on YouTube.
Ooh, very nice.
But all of you guys have been here quite a while.
Yeah.
Yes, and I think I'm trying to remember if we know who's been here. I might be the person who's been on for the least amount of time, and even I have crossed, I think, 8 years, or maybe Highland G and I are somewhere around the same area, but you know, it's not the years, it's the mileage, as they say. But thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. I am For the Love of Comics, and of course, these are people whose videos and whose YouTube channels I have enjoyed. Highland G, Black Pole, and I usually have a live chat over on Highland G's channel, and we've had I think almost a dozen different conversations over the years. And Gore Vidal, I've known on YouTube, in the comment section, in other videos, and on live streams and conversations, like on Sleepy Reader's channel, etc. So it's been a group of people who've been in each other's orbit quite a lot, and I'm just very thrilled to have all of you on this. I'm also very thrilled to be talking this evening about Strangers in Paradise, a suggestion and recommendation that Highland G and Blackpole made, which I was, for reasons that we'll get into, really excited to jump into. And I'm very happy to have Gore Vidal and Sleepy Reader join us. I'm just curious, and for our viewers here, both on the live stream as well as watching the recording later, maybe we can go around one more time and talk a little bit about our experience with this comic. How long have we known about this comic? How familiar are we with it? Is this, I know for some of us it's a reread, but what number reread is this? When did we first encounter it? And we'll obviously get into what we think about it in detail, but as a quick overview, and we'll start from the reverse order now. Sleepy Reader, you and Strangers in Paradise, what's the deal?
I am a newbie to Strangers in Paradise. I have for years owned the Strangers in Paradise omnibus. This is volume 1. It's 2 volumes, and it also comes with a book of just the covers. So it's one of those things where you buy up a hardback because you don't know how long it'll be in print. And then I was kind of intimidated to get started because there's so much. Each volume's like over 1,000 pages. So, so this is my first read through, and I'm realizing it would help if it was my second read through, because there's a lot to take in, and a complex weave of elements and plots and characters. So I would say that my biggest takeaway for people like me who like to buy hardback omnibuses is maybe don't in this case, because this omnibus, although published by his own imprint, is badly designed because there's no breaks. I was reading for 173 pages before I realized, wait a minute, I don't know where the breaks are here. There's no titles. There's no covers included because the covers are separate, and it's you need pausing points, I feel, to absorb a story like this. Plus, since we were supposed to read about 35 issues, I couldn't figure out where 35 issues were. But so I think maybe in this case it might be better to get the trades, each of which is a bit of an arc or something, because of the nature of this story. It's very hard to it was very hard for me to sort of put it all together. I would have anyway. Other than that, it's a beautiful omnibus, and so I'm definitely glad I read it.
All right, Blackpole, what about you? Do you share in Sleepy's experience?
No, we've already got some fighting words going on. I mean that in the best of ways. No, I have the same set that you have, Damien, the double omnibus with the card covers, and it's one of those that if you are ever curious, go look on eBay what they go for. They are, because they were out of print, and Terry Moore had said when he originally did this run for Abstract Studios that this was the only time he would collect it in this format. So even the new Dark Horse had just announced that in October this year, the volume 1 omnibus is going to be the same size as the trades that came out just a few years ago, this 4-volume paperback. So I like it enough that I've got my reader copy, my 4-volume paperback one, and then the same omnibus one. And it's the same thing. There's no breaks. There's no table of contents. There's no breaks. So when I was trying to figure out how many issues to read, we want to do 3 live streams basically to cover each third. And when I was looking through that, I was trying to figure out where to break it, and I was like, it's just going to have to be a number. Like, I'm just going to guess at 35 issues and hope it ends up in an arc because of the way that it's laid out. So you're not alone in that kind of challenge of figuring out where you are. And it might be worth talking about at some point during the live stream is that, like, it must be intentional by Terry Moore to remove all those breaks and to have it set up this way and to have no table of contents. And what's his meaning. I'm assuming that anyways, and then maybe discussing what's the meaning behind that. But this is my second read through. And I think the idea kind of came as we were having a live stream, and I was talking about how I really wanted to reread this, but it's a big undertaking at 2,000 plus pages, 107 issues total in the main story. So thankfully, Highland G and FtLoC Comics were like, well, let's do it as a big group read and bring some people in, and it got me motivated. And so I was so excited. And Damien, there's a lot going on, but the first read through, obviously you do learn more the second time because you kind of know what's going on. But there's a part of me that's jealous of going through it for the first time and being surprised at where the story goes, the different themes that unfold, and how it runs. So I challenge you to just enjoy that, not knowing when you can, and immerse yourself in the story. So, yeah.
So just out of curiosity, how long ago was your first read of this? Yeah,
thank you. Highland G and I did it together, actually. We did, I think, a couple of live streams. It was either one or two that we did, but we did a read together when we were running things, the two of us. So probably 2018, 2019, I'm guessing, is when we did that first one, somewhere around there. So yeah, it also brings back memories in this kind of like, when I think of Strangers of Paradise, I also think of Highland G in my time, that we were really consistent every month of being together and talking comics.
Very cool. And Highland G, is that kind of similar, or are there variations for you?
So yeah, my story maybe starts a little bit earlier, where like I'd read Rachel Rising, and that was a book that I'd really enjoyed, and then I started discussing with Blackpool what we were going to read one month. We just kind of were choosing things month to month, what we were going to kind of pick up, and some things were longer, like Paper Girls, and some stuff was shorter kind of runs. And yeah, we decided to do Strangers in Paradise, and I got the big hardcovers, and we read through it. So that was my kind of first experience of it. And because I've read kind of Rachel Rising, and most of his kind of work that I've seen kind of had that kind of flowing into itself kind of feel, where like even if there were issue breaks, it wasn't necessarily a definitive stop point, because just the way that he writes doesn't necessarily always come to definitive stop points. But yeah, I wasn't a fan of having a massive hardcover on my shelf, so I ended up getting rid of the hardcover, and I have since read pretty much everything else apart from Echo, and I have all the other sort of smaller hardcovers. So I do really enjoy the full kind of set of his work. So when you guys or we were kind of discussing doing this, I was looking forward to kind of going back to the start of that universe and revisiting some of those kind of characters, because like Blackpool, I just discussed at the time, I'm not massively into some of the format stuff in here, which we'll maybe get into a bit later, like the kind of heavy prose elements and things like that. But there are characters here that I really enjoy and kind of connected with, and that also kind of go into some of the further stories in the other books. So it's kind of nice to have that refresher of the origins, if you like.
Right. And did you reread it? So, I mean, you said you got rid of the hardcover. So how did you reread it this time around?
So I got it from, I forget what the digital charity thing, Humble Bundle. I got a whole bunch of his stuff that way because I wanted to get Echo. And,
so it was digital.
So digital, yeah, but it was digital as the trades. So what was interesting is like at the end of the first arc, I got some like back material that kind of explained the origin of how he came up with the main sort of two characters, and it started out as this sort of newspaper comic strip type thing, rather than see if I can find it in here. There was this kind of
like a literal strip, yeah.
Yeah, like classic kind of like jokey strips that would go at the bottom of a newspaper or something like that. And apparently he tried it out with various different variations over time until he found something that kind of clicked for him but didn't necessarily sell to them, but he then went off and did his own thing.
Sorry,
So
Sleepy, you
it's
had a
interesting.
question?
Who?
Oh, sorry. I thought you had a question for Highland
Well,
G.
when he said it was like in strips, I read somewhere that Stranger in Paradise characters started out in comic strips that he was trying to sell to newspapers, and maybe
Right,
that's
those
what
are
Slippery was saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it kind of like evolves, and you can kind of see how it becomes more the sort of Strangers in Paradise characters over kind of time.
So that's awesome that you get that material. I wish that was in my omnibus.
So that was
Another
nice. That
reason
was
to
the
avoid
end of
the
the first
omnibuses.
trade, and I think that was because the way that it reads to me is like the first trade was like a let's see if this will work type thing. So it's quite fairly self-contained, and then after that, the story is kind of ongoing.
Right.
So although there are sort of arc breaks, if you like, where like this is split into trades for me. So I read trades like 1 to 7 or something like that.
Right.
Some of them were broken up and some of them weren't. It was interesting. Like some of them, like the whole trade was just like one issue basically, and some of them would have like issue covers in between the issues. It just seemed to be whatever he chose to do at the time. But I feel that, like, I don't know about you guys, but I feel like there was a lot of experimentation kind of going on throughout this of just different styles and layouts of how things kind of worked. I mentioned to FtLoC Comics yesterday when we were having a kind of test that I noted with the longer kind of conversational stuff. Very early on, it was just a bland kind of like white page with the conversation kind of like scripted down the page, and that slowly evolved into kind of having the text either side with the characters at the bottom, and it kind of looked more comic booky while still using the economy of space kind of thing. And there was just like things that slowly evolved through sort of trial and error.
I'm sure we'll get into more of this as we go along. But Gore Vidal, a lot of these seem to be recent readings. Is that your experience with Strangers in Paradise as well, or do you go back further with this series?
Yes, you could say it is a recent reading. And oddly enough, when Terry Moore published this comic in '93, I was living in Houston, but I had basically stopped reading comics. And I would occasionally visit comic shops, but I wouldn't buy anything. And I don't remember seeing the comic at the shops. I might have, though. The reason I decided to read was when I returned to comics after 2010.
We lost your audio, Gore.
Hello? Oops.
We can't hear you.
And it was just getting good too.
Yeah.
Yes, unfortunately.
Maybe you need to go around your iPad and check if the audio, and if it's still not working, maybe leave and rejoin the live stream, I would think.
Yeah, that's the live stream version of turn it off and on again.
Right.
But yeah, while you try to fix that, maybe we can. He's putting on some real pantomime over there.
He's just talking about how he's gonna have his lawyers coming to talk to you guys about these technical issues, and that this shouldn't affect the pay that we've got to give him. There's gonna be some contractual issues.
We're in trouble now.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting that none of us read these in the original single issues.
Yeah,
and
because
I think
as I was,
that would be an extremely different experience. Waiting for it to come out each month, as the story complicates and the narrative styles and the visual styles, and you'd be surprised each month where it's going. I would like that experience, but of course you can't. You can't.
Yeah,
it is something that. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, especially looking, it started in '93 and it runs up till 2007. So you've got like this 14 years where you've got these arcs and all these breaks and stuff like that. And you're right, it can be such a different reading experience. I will say this time around, though, I feel like I'm reading it like it's harder to put down for me. So like I'm kind of like I was tearing through them at a pace that I normally don't tear through comics. So I was happy with that. But yeah, you're right, Damon. It would over
Yeah.
a 14-year period would have been much different experience.
I was reading about
Yeah.
like 200 pages at a sitting.
Oh wow.
Yeah, well, I mean,
a
I was
very different kind of experience for me.
Yeah.
I think of all people, Damien, you and I have the closest experience because I read it for the first time for this live stream. And this became the Gore Vidal's here. And we'll see if his audio is back. But yes, I read it for the first time for this live stream, and over the last, and even though we've had a couple of months or something like that, I did, because of being busy, I didn't get to it until about less than 2 weeks ago. So it's been 1 week, and it was my experience as well because I was reading it in these omnibuses, but they're the paperback omnibuses, so it's in that box set slipcase, and I think this might be the reprint that you were referring to, Blackpole. I'm not sure because there's just 2 of these. There are not 4 trades. There are 2.
Yeah.
Two
This one's a little
paperbacks
different.
in
It's a little
slipcase.
thinner. This one's
Right,
probably
okay.
yours is probably 1,000. These are about 480. The 4-volume
Yeah.
ones that came out. I want to say it came out in 2024.
Right.
Yeah, I think
okay.
they sold them individually because they've also done hardcovers more recently that are even smaller.
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
Lots
Yeah,
of different
so these-
formats on his website from
Lots
lot
of
of
different
formats.
formats. Yeah. And I think one of the reasons why I've heard about Strangers in Paradise for years, it has quite a reputation, but I never got a chance to read it because the trades, there were so many trades, and they were not always labeled properly. Like they only had the name, they didn't have a number against them. And then when I would go on Wikipedia and look up the trades, then I would realize that trade 3 is available, but not 4 and 5. And then 7 is available, but not 1. And so the box set was out of print for the longest time. But when it came back into print, the paperback box set, I finally grabbed it last year. And then it's been sitting on my shelves intimidating me until this wonderful opportunity came around. So for me, too, it was a brand new read just in the last week or so. And my experience was quite similar, in which I literally read a couple of 100 pages a day, going through it, in 5 or 6 days, the 1,060 pages that the first volume makes up. But Gore, let's see if your audio is back.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
perfect.
Okay. This is probably going to be happening. And for the audience who's watching, the reason I keep turning around, I have camera issues here, so I really can't see the guests here. So I keep doing this back and forth. I'm not being rude to them. Can you still hear me? Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yes.
absolutely.
Okay. I'm going to be quick so I don't get caught up again. Okay. Reason I avoided the comic when I returned to it because I didn't think I would like it. I would look through back issues and look through it. It looked cartoony. The artwork, I thought it was maybe something like an Archie type of comic, so I didn't give it a chance. And I think this is one of the reasons the comic is not as well known as it should be. But it was when Rachel Rising dropped, and I read the dialogue. The dialogue is fascinating. He writes some of the best dialogues in comics. He's able to talk about the mundane in an interesting way. He puts effort into just basic conversations. That's why it's easy to read 100 pages a day, because you are just engrossed with this. You do not get bored with this writing. So Rachel Rising said, okay, I really like this. I'm going to give Strangers in Paradise a chance. And I got trades and I got singles. And I do agree the trades is the way to go with this thing for new people. If you like it, then you get these big monsters. But you introduce them with these volumes and you get them. But yes, that was my introduction to the book. And this is my second reading of the book. And yes, it's a lot of stuff to take in, but it's definitely worth it.
Yeah, I mean, which is a good segue into a very non-spoilery, because I'm sure some of our conversations will get into spoiler territory, but a very non-spoilery, like, what do we feel about this comic? What do we feel when we first read it? Or if it's your second read, I guess Sleepy and we can talk about it as a summary judgment on our first read of half of it for the first time. But for the other three of you, Highland G, why don't we start with you? quick bite-sized sort of summary for our viewers of what your feelings are or what your judgment is of this series?
Wow, it's difficult. Um,
This is no easy questions here.
I, as I was saying a little bit earlier, I guess like I kind of split it into two sections where there's the first kind of arc was its own kind of thing, and then the second kind of arc is then on sort of an ongoing series. So the first arc for me is really good. There's a lot to kind of take in really fast. There's a lot of characters kind of thrown at you that have different backgrounds, things kind of going on, and it's really, really enjoyable from that kind of aspect. Apart from that, it's very traditional kind of comics. The second arc, as we kind of are ongoing, things become a bit more experimental with having things like music and prose and other things kind of thrown in throughout the story to give depth, recaps, kind of stuff like that. But I really enjoy the character connections, the sort of emotional stuff, the way that the different characters kind of either react in a good way or a bad way to a situation. Some of the extreme cartoon moments where things might actually change complete art styles to kind of accentuate something a little bit. But yeah, I don't know how to kind of sum it all up. It's kind of like a day-to-day slice of life story with like espionage thrown in there, if that's a way to sum things up.
Sure, you know,
Like,
as we do with slice of life stories.
you know, like that's basically the two things clashing, and you'll lean towards either one at different parts of the story to be more sort of intrigued in and interested in. It might be a everyday sort of like, you know, your aunt's visiting type moment, or it could be, you know, someone's trying to take over the White House or something. But you know, you've got two different elements constantly contrasting, and I think it's interesting.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Blackpool, you had the spoiler for us that it's one of your top 2 favorite comics of all time. So how would you sell it to a newcomer or someone who has no idea about it?
Yeah. Well, I think picking up on that thread that Gore laid down, you know, the dialogue, and what I think is so intriguing, especially going through the second time, is how quickly the characters become alive. Within the first issue or two, each one of the characters, their personality is almost fully formed to where they're going to be even later on. You know, Kachu is, and I'm not going to give any spoilers, but just broadly, I mean, she's unforgiving. She's going to speak the honest truth right from the beginning. Francine is, you know, kind of the opposite. You know, she's a little bit more some of that Southern genteel, like going to be proper. And so I feel like between the dialogue and the fact that like right from the beginning, the characters felt fleshed out and individual, and they felt like each one of them contains something I know inside of myself. So even when they're going through stuff, like I can relate to Freddie, I can relate to David, I can relate to all of these characters, at least in some of how they act and some how they talk. And the thing that what I really love about this story is that you read the first 3 issues and yeah, it feels like it's slice of life. And then all of a sudden you get into what's this with the politicians? What's this with Washington, D.C.? Who are these Parker girls? What's going on with Tambi? Why are they in Hawaii? Oh, what's this critique on art? Oh, how come they're 10 years in the future and somebody's got a kid? It just grows into this complex web in an organic way. It doesn't feel like it's forced into these areas to morph. And so it's so genre bending in one sense that it just hits on a bunch of different areas, which I really love. Not to mention just the beautiful artwork. I don't know how many times through again, I stop and I'm like, yeah, this is just, you know, it's the same thing that Love and Rockets does for me, right? That black and white artwork, when it's on point, the inking, it's just so beautiful that it stops me in my tracks from time to time. So much to love here. But that, I mean, there's, you know, this is a story about love, about secrets, about espionage, about shame, about relationships, art. I mean, it's abuse, trauma that we carry. There's so many different adjectives to describe what the story's about that it feels so big in a really good way. Like it just, for me, it speaks to everything I like about these genre bending comics.
I mean, to me at least, I can say that I had no idea what I was in for when I started reading this. I don't know what my expectations were. I think I had some sort of a, like, yeah, you mentioned Love and Rockets, and shout out to Gore's t-shirt as well from Fantagraphics there. But I did because maybe of what I had seen of the black and white artwork and the fact that it seemed to be quite women-centric, I did think about Jaime Hernandez. And again, that Archie influence is something that I saw early on, in which you've got this, this statuesque proportions, but you also have these extremely cartoonish facial expressions, and the wow, almost like a Peanuts and Charlie Brown type of vocalizations and things like that. But it's such an interesting mix that as I was reading it, I was like, well, it's also reminding me of Scott McCloud, and I think there was some Zott soda, which seemed like an obvious reference, and then some parts of it felt like Alison Bechdel and like indie comics, black and white comics that I'd seen. But I honestly thought it was going to be the way it starts out with the miniseries, a slice of life relationship story. What I was not expecting was everything else that's in there, which is it's slapstick comedy and sex farce, and then it is espionage and White House shenanigans and this very noir crime story and this extreme melodrama, all sort of mixed in together. And I think even now that we've made some points of like, how many genres can you pack into one comic while keeping it organic or not having it feel like, oh, I'm just completely doing a different thing in this issue than it's like they all feel like it's part of the same world, and you'll see something that's slapstick and something that's very cartoonish violence, and then you'll have the police repercussions for it, and you'll have someone get arrested for assault, and it's not just cartoonish violence, but that violence is still there. And so how ludicrous can things get but still seem grounded, I think, is the one thing to me, I mean, among other things, which we'll again talk about, but to me, the most incredible thing is how difficult it is to describe and encapsulate. Yeah, I don't know if Sleepy, since you were also reading it for the first time and not revisiting it, was that similar to you, or did you have a different type of approach?
Yeah, so when I hear Matt say it's his favorite or second favorite comic of all time, I feel a little bad because I don't even know if I like it yet or not. Cool. I mean, obviously I do like it on the level that I can't stop reading it, but I feel a sense of whiplash as I was reading it. As you say, you think it's a slice of life, and then sort of a comedic light slice of life, and then it gets really heavy and intense, and then it goes off in these espionage and crime and conspiracy theory directions, and then the cartoon. And so my feeling as I've gotten so far is it's both amateurish and highly sophisticated at the same time. This kind of feeling of this author can't make up his mind what he's doing, felt kind of amateurish, and because it's in black and white, and it sort of reminds me of a lot of the stuff that came out in the 80s that was somewhere between fanzine work and professional work. And it felt like it came out of that. And I love that kind of stuff, actually. I love sort of the fanish fanzine kind of comics when I find them. But trying, something about my mind, and I think many other people's, you try to pigeonhole what it is you're reading. And that kind of drove me crazy to an extent. But it also drove me forward, through this endless story to, what is this? I need to find out more. And to me, and it was like, which character to focus on? I think in the end, I spent most of my emotion on Francine, but you could go with a different character. I'm the most traumatized character, I guess, is Kachu, but I related to Francine a little more. And I also felt like maybe Terry Moore relates to Francine the most, because I thought as it developed, she had the most subtle, interesting expressions throughout. And I thought his drawings of her became the most loving. You also get the sense as you read this that he's in love with what he's doing.
Yeah.
And in comes through in the drawing styles. And I was also amazed because at first I thought, oh, I'm watching his style evolve, which is happening, but he'll switch back. He's I'm trying to follow like the emotional reasons why he's drawing in different ways. Sometimes it's subtle changes, but it's not just a steady progression into more and more sophisticated. It's a mix. So it's a utterly fascinating comic, but I just don't know what I think about it yet.
Well, what about you, Gore? I mean, do you have a more specified opinion than what Sleepy is saying?
My understanding is that first, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay. Is basically he came up with Francine. He understood Francine. And then Kachu was a mystery to him. But then Kachu took over his imagination. This is what Terry Moore has said. It's kind of like in Creepax's Valentina. He creates Valentina as a side character for a male hero, and then Valentina takes over. This is what happened with. He understood Francine. He did not really understand Kachu, so he wanted to explore her more. And that's why she's a complete mystery through much of this story. It's like layers of onions that you're peeling, and they make you cry as you learn more about her. Now, regarding this, the way I sell it to people is many years ago, there was a TV show. I watched it, the first episode. Didn't think I was going to like it. It was about some chemistry teacher who had some medical problem with his kid. And there's some kind of meth kid that he has, a student. And so years pass. And the next thing I know, people talking about this show, and it's called Breaking Bad. And suddenly they're telling me that that chemistry teacher is now some meth king. And I said, that can't be the same show. and so this is basically with Strangers in Paradise. Those first 3 issues, it does start out that way. It's a slice of life storyline about high school friends and who meet up after many years. But then something happens in a jail cell with one of the characters, and you're thinking, wait a minute. How is it she's able to do that? Why is she able to do that? This is something new. And then what she does to basically help her friend, something has happened to Francine. We're talking about Kachu here. Suddenly we're in whole new territory. And then you have 2 people who should not be friends. One is the Joni Mitchell, Lou Reed crowd. The other one is the Beyonce, Taylor Swift crowd. Different audiences. They don't mix well together. One is Kachu, one is Francine. One, you go to 90s music, is Sonic Youth. The other one is the Cranberries. And what is the bridge between them? The song Dreams.
Yeah.
And dreams is something central to the story, right? And so these should not be friends, but they see something in each other that they need. There's something in them. And one is a very conventional middle-class family, Francine's, all appearances, wonderful family. Kachu's is horrific. And yet these 2 people find each other. Like the title says, Strangers in Paradise, where basically is, love is central to this. And even this exploration of love between these 2 women under a weak writer would become salacious, a male fantasy, or completely just didactic. That doesn't happen. And my final point, we're going to Love and Rockets. One of the ironies about this is that the Jaime Hernandez, Hopi and Maggie, if we're going into the stereotypes of Hispanics, right? Jaime Hernandez is a straight male, Hispanic, Spanish from Mexico, who writes some of the most convincing female characters in comics. And not only that, but deals with LGBT matters in a very convincing, realistic way. Terry Moore is a Texan, Houstonian, straight guy, married, has kids, and he's from Texas. All the stereotypes about Texas. And he does the same thing. He's got that ability. So the way I sell this comic is basically, I use the Breaking Bad analogy. You're in for one hell of a ride with the storyline. It's very unconventional. It will defy your expectations. And this is one of the few comics that emotionally hits you. Because she goes from a wonderful moment of joy and playfulness to one of deep pathos with these characters, how he does those panels, sometimes without any words. and literally it breaks your heart, not in a Hallmark sort of way, but in a basically in a dramatic and sometimes tragic manner. So that's like thinking about this.
Yeah, I mean,
Great
again, to me, I think Sleepy, you were making the point of you're not sure whether you like it yet, and I was maybe in some ways the opposite, which is like about halfway through that 1,000 pages. About I was just like, this is fantastic, but I don't know why. Like, I don't know why it's like it shouldn't work in many ways. And I think what we're talking about here is that subversion of expectation. It really says something about the readers and our need to pigeonhole and have something. And I think I saw one of the comments that said that Lash G says that my introduction was he mistook it for Stray Bullets, and I get it, because it's like that Uber Alice edition also has that black cover and black spine, and
Right.
it's got that there's one of the paperbacks has that torn sort of where you only see her eyes, and it's very Stray Bullets in its presentation. But I thought that the reason why I like Stray Bullets is because of the grit of it, the realism of it, married to this extremely colorful dialogue, this very character-based way of talking. This series had it, and that to me was that the strength of character and the strength of dialogue, that's been mentioned across all of these bizarre storylines, which are, again, going all over the place, but it holding that as an integrity, like at the core of it, like it seems like the same story, even though it shouldn't. And you'll have these extremely serious things, and you'll have these very silly things, and I quite enjoyed the slapstick for the same reason why I enjoy Jaime Hernandez and Gilbert Hernandez, taking that sort of Harry Lucy and Dan DiCarlo, that Archie comic expressiveness and energy, and putting that into a real slice of life kind of. I like the marriage of those things. It's only in comics that it could work, or maybe in a little bit of anime, maybe, but you wouldn't be able to do this in live action. You wouldn't be able to go to those extremes and still think about it as the same material. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why even in my first reading of it, as I'm reading it, I can see this as being a fantastic comic. And I get what you're saying, Sleepy, about the amateur kind of feel to it. But to me, I felt like I was in the hands of a storyteller who's like really at top of their game. So only someone like that could get me, could sell this to me, because there's no way it should be working. I don't know what any of you feel about that, but that as a first time reader, that was my reaction.
Well, as I've read more, and I see him coming back to things that he planted, which in his time was years before, I am pretty amazed. Like even the very first scene, so it's not a big spoiler, the very first scene in the book is Francine's traumatic experience at a school play where she gets exposed on stage. And that returns as a really important thing, which must have been written, years and years later. And that was brilliant. And it started, that was a point where things really started to tie together for me. Like that maybe there is like a master plan here. There's still, as far as we've, read like 750 or more pages, a lot of dangling threads. So I'll be interested to see how all of them, how many of them come back or get fully integrated, but it's impressive.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention too, Damien, if it doesn't resonate with you or parts don't resonate with you, please bring them up. I don't like my views on what I care. It's not my top two. It's one of my top two. I can't decide between what my favorite one is of all time, but it's one of my top two. But it doesn't affect me at all. But I enjoy these kind of conversations because they start to show me blind spots that I hadn't thought about before, or they highlight things that in a good way that make it a little more impressive to me. But yeah, honesty above all else. Don't worry about it affecting me. And just one of the other things I like to say, I really enjoyed the cultural aspects that were put in there. Like the stuff where, he starts this in 93. And so we're starting to move away from, or we're actually probably pretty far moved away from a lot of the discussion around AIDS. And yet he puts talk of AIDS in there because of how prominent it was just a few years before that. And it looks like Gore may have something to show here for the love of comics. Let's see, maybe highlight that one. But the whole that, you know, just the way that he hit on AIDS, the way that he hit on like the gym and the workout scenes and the stuff he did, just unbelievable. Yeah.
I mean, I thought, you know, the fact that it is early 90s or mid 90s and the way it progresses, there are a lot of cultural touchstones, and obviously technology, etc., is one of those. But in some ways, it also felt very contemporary.
Yeah.
You know, like I mean, we're reading in 2026, and while it's definitely in a certain place and time, something about the storytelling felt very modern. Something about it felt not as, you know, it's not abrasively indie, or it's not. I don't know what your thoughts are, all of you, on like whether you agree with that or what you think contributes to that, if you do, or is it very much of its time and place? Would you think that it translates easily for a contemporary reader who hasn't read anything from the 90s and only reading, you know, in the last 10 or 15 years? Is it something they can go back to and grab onto easily?
I'm not sure, because a lot of indie comics, as I know them right now, the writers are very sophisticated and they've kind of studied Hollywood a lot. So they tend to have things in a certain way, you know, with the the acts and the arcs, where things kind of fit together in a slicker way. And so the non-slickness of this in terms of its structure might turn off someone who's only been reading comics of the past 10 years. But I'm not sure. It has more of that, to me, it has more of that 80s anything goes kind of indie comics feel. But I could be, you know, that's just my perception of it. So when I started reading it, I actually, until I checked the dates, I thought this was written, you know, circa 1985, not 1993 when it started, from the look and feel of it. In just my experience of what indie comics I've read, I suppose.
See, for me, it kind of has modern elements, but modern elements that fit into different things. So, like, I'd say the art is very akin to a lot of more modern sort of teen manga, where you do have those sort of explosive art moments where things completely change the art style and then kind of go back for different moments and things like that. But a manga wouldn't have anywhere near the level of prose that's in this, for instance. But then if you look at some of the newer sort of image books that have come out, like Monstrous and things like that, they'll have 2 or 3 pages of prose between issues to kind of catch you up on things. So depending on what modern things you're used to, I think there will be elements of this that will, you know, work better for different kind of people. The one thing that I would say kind of stands out with this book a little bit, and it's both kind of a way of tackling the way that they've kind of tackled the book, but also something that can cause weird breaks at times, is that it feels like the overall story is kind of being created in pieces and then kind of put together. So there's different elemental parts that may have been reordered or, you know, like sort of sorted together to you know, complete arcs or complete overall kind of stories. And because of that, it allows them to cover a lot more characters, because I don't know if you guys have kind of noticed, but when they introduce a character early on, they're only really maybe in somebody else's story. So a character might be hanging out with Kachu for part of certain story arcs. But then once they are an established character, we might actually get an arc or a sequence or two where it's them speaking to their boss or their gang leader or whoever it is, and you kind of get more depth into those kind of characters for a bit, and then it'll kind of come back to one of the main characters. So rather than jumping between, say, 3 characters' story, as the story progresses, we're jumping between 8 or 9 different characters' stories that are all kind of intertwining, and it kind of is only growing over time. But that does mean that for me, there's on occasion moments where I'm like, wait, what kind of happened there? Like, one that kind of comes to mind just now is one kind of fairly later on in our read where Kachu gets like blackout drunk in a bar, and I think it's Tambi carries her out of the bar. But we don't get anything kind of following up that sequence. It just jumps to a following morning or day, which we don't really know. And Kachu's walking down the street and sees that the bar's been closed. And then later on, without kind of spoiling things, she kind of gets caught up with kind of Tambi again. But it's kind of reacted as if this is the first time that she's kind of come across her in a while. And to me, I was left a little bit being like, but she literally lifted you out of a bar yesterday. So like there was just a couple of moments like that where like maybe I'm supposed to, you know, have put something together that wasn't there, but like there's just a couple of times where it doesn't quite connect the story sections as well as maybe it could, and maybe that's something that would put some people off. But I've, you know, got to the point that I said I've read it before, so I kind of expect it to an extent in certain bits, and I'm reading it as a bunch of shorts that connect as one story rather than as something that is completely linear, if that makes sense.
Let me
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, let me interject. Can you hear me again?
Yeah, we can
Yes.
hear you.
Okay. That scene there, I think it's from the past. I think that's when Kachu goes to look for David, and she figures she's probably going to be with Darcy, and she's going to a bar that she used to visit when she was younger. And this is where the background of Kachu's life, from age 15 to the first 10 years of her life, are very dark, very grim. The stuff she is basically endures, what she's trained for, what she's used for, and this is something that I think is universal. And I guess regarding about this comic, about for new readers, is okay. You have the AIDS issues in the early '90s, which was a major issue, and for others, maybe not younger people or people of this generation didn't experience what happened with people who had AIDS back then and the stigma with it, right? But the Parker girls, the Epstein files, right? The Epstein files now, and the connection, maybe they're being used by governments to basically blackmail people, right? What do the Parker girls do? Again, we haven't discussed this in the comic, but that's an elephant basically of that, where people in power, politicians, are now in utter fear of the Parker girls and what information they have on them. So in that sense, the comic was very prophetic in some ways. And also early on in the comic, it talked about the tech people. Terry Moore knew about the tech people who were going to take over, because that's alluded to in some of the early stories, right? About tech billionaires, right? And this is before Facebook guys and all those people, the Silicon people, really boomed, so to speak. And now he lives here in Texas. You know, here in Texas, Houston and Austin, all those places have basically been attracting all these tech people for decades now. And so the comic, in that sense, is very relevant for today, at least from this aspect. But really, in the heart is this story about friendship and love between these people. And someone in the comment there, with that song by New Order, Bizarre Love Triangle, because we haven't talked about David. David's another important factor here. So if you have David, Francine, and Kachu, they do form an interesting, they do have a fascinating relationship and interaction, and certainly love is at the heart of this. But one fine, if I may say something about this, is this scene here from the first issue. This is not the original; this is a reprint, right? Regarding Terry Moore and how this just boomed, is that my understanding is that he first pictured one of the first things he had was a scene, Francine having an argument with Freddie at a park and taking off her clothes. That's one of the earliest conceptions of this. And then he began to ask himself, what would cause a woman to do that? And then from there, Kachu and everything else blossomed. And he did a one shot. He took it to Houston, to a Comic Con, where it was heavy with DC. And he shopped it around with all the indie creators there, publishers. They found it interesting, but no one would touch it. he goes to the DC table and he meets, Damien would know this, he meets Archie Goodwin. Now, for many of us, we know Archie Goodwin is a legendary editor, writer. I discovered him in Epic magazine when I was a kid in the 80s. And Terry Moore respected Archie Goodwin. He showed him this issue. I guess it was a Xerox copy of this issue. He liked the work, but he goes, we really can't use this, but we can give you work. And we can give you work for us. And maybe some minor character. He was excited. He went home. But then he thought about it. And there was a video that Terry Moore made about this. That he said, I was in a cover band. And for many years. And at this time, I think he was doing video editing for television. And I was in a cover band. And now I have a chance to work for DC, one of the big, the big giants, right? But I'm going to be basically doing other people's characters. So in a way, I'm going to be like a cover band artist.
Right.
I don't want to do that. So he took a risk, a huge risk, and he turned Archie Goodwin down. And he went with this passion. And he found one publisher who said, yeah, we'll do it for you. Can you come up with another storyline? And that's why he came up with issues 2 and 3. And that's why this is known as Volume 1. Okay. And the next thing you know, you get the beautiful Dream of You storyline, which I made a video about this because I was so intrigued by it. And I showed that scene about the AIDS, the AIDS scene, which someone very close to Couture is dying of AIDS, and Emma. And that's when I knew this was not your typical comic that I expected, in the sense that this was not all my expectations, my prejudices, my biases. This is something entirely different. And I was in.
Yeah. And I think that, it's these kind of things that made me think about it as contemporary, in the way that it refuses to be one thing, and at the same time it feels so integrated, like all of those multiple parts that seem so bizarre are actually part of one thing. So I think when I think about older comics, and maybe I don't have the same experience with the independent American comics, but even what I've read, they seem to be very voicey, and they're very like, oh, I'm of this genre and I'm this in your face, or I'm trying to do this kind of stuff, and that's what it is in very, very. And what I found about this is like it just wanted to be a different thing. Almost every issue, every storyline was going to be about a different thing or be a completely different genre, but it still made sense within that thing. And that kind of complexity, I thought, was quite mature. Like, I think even it extends to the thing. And we had a good question about what do we think about this love triangle and this bizarre love triangle and the refusal to classify, whether it is as gay, and that it happens many times where someone says, you're gay, and she says, I'm not gay. And then someone else says, are you gay? And then just this isn't really the point. The point is love. And can you have, later on this love triangle between Kachu and Francine and David kind of becomes a rectangle where a fourth character enters the picture, and then it's like everyone is equally sympathetic and everyone is equally flawed, and they're making these decisions that you may not necessarily agree with, but you kind of understand where they're coming from. It has a maturity in its approach to character and their lives and the messiness of their lives that I found to be quite electric, but it wasn't doing it like those sort of like everyone in an apartment having conversations. You had a villain who shows they're a villain by asking their henchmen to shoot a hummingbird that is feeding. It's like the most pulpy sort of representation of villainy that you could come up with. And these are right next to each other. Like you've got that, sort of tragic sequence and this kind of scenery chewing hammy villainy just happening within panels of each other. And I understand what you mean by whiplash, like, because I can sense it, but it doesn't hurt me. In fact, it's like I really enjoyed the fact that all of this held together in spite of it having no business holding together. And that, I thought, made it feel made it feel very contemporary. Like, as in, like, this is someone who's studying the form to such an extent that they can bend it to do whatever storytelling they want to do, and they can get away with it. That is not something that I see very often, and I see people play it safe or sort of be abrasive. And I was wondering whether other people thought the same way about it or felt like it was, I think, again, in the comments, I saw someone that, oh, if it wasn't for the slapstick, it would be great. But, for me, it's like, but the whole point is that you are able to get away by having the slapstick in there. I mean, I'm curious of what all of you think about that sort of, that variety happening with such proximity. Like, you'll have this really serious story, and then they're out on the beach relaxing, and that entire issue is them just on the beach, and they've gone through this incredible stuff, and now this is a moment of calm, but it's also very charming. It's also very, and then from the next story onwards, move on to more and, bigger and better things. I don't know if that makes sense, but there was something very alluring about that level of that sort of high wire act.
If I may, just to add to that, is again in one of the storylines is we're going back to when Francine has that terrible time at a play, right? It's a very funny part where she's at a play doing Strangers in Paradise, and her robe comes off, right? And she's basically topless in front of an audience. It's pretty funny, the way he draws it and such, right? So you got the humor. But then so now she's humiliated, talking to her mom. How can I go back to high school? How can I do this? My life is over. And you got this. But then you turn the panel, and there's someone at her window, because Kachu would visit her at her home through the window. And it's Kachu, and you see this. Yeah. Suddenly, that emotion of joy, you're just broken with this scene here. And you know what has just happened. And I won't describe it to the reader, for the people who have not read this.
Right.
And suddenly you're thinking, that's why the humor here works so, and this is how this issue ends, because the next issue is issue 15. And that's how that ends, right? And one thing about this is, if you think like in Wuthering Heights, Heathcliff, or the Count of Monte Cristo, what they have is two people who leave or are taken, and then they come back. But they come back very different. With Kachu, she leaves after this for many years, and then she returns. And that's where the comic begins, the friendship. Oh, we've been separated. Hey, where have you been? Where you been? Oh, I've been here, I've been there. And I'm an artist now. But where has she been? And again, something happens in the jail cell. She's able to do something that no one should be able to do. And we alluded to the Parker girls and the espionage elements. And that's why this story is just so freaking intriguing. Because throughout this, he adds more and more to the mystery of Kachu, the revelations of it, of who she is. And that, in the end, basically for me, is the main factor of this book, when it keeps me just so entrenched with it. And the other characters are fantastic, but it's this thing of what he does with Kachu. But again, it's panels like that, which just, when I saw that, and I know what that meant, it just breaks your heart.
Yeah, I like that the end of where we kind of read up to, where we go back into high school and stuff like that. I think one of the other reasons it works is, you try to get two disparate forces or two opposing characters to come together, and we get that in that. I think it's in that arc where he goes back into high school, and they show Kachu on one side and Francine on one side starting their day, right? And Francine's alarm clock goes off, and she's singing along and clapping with it. And Kachu's under the covers, like wanting to go back to sleep. And Francine goes down, and her food's there, and her parents are there. And then Kachu's lighting a cigarette underneath the blankets, and her parents are yelling at her to turn the Van Halen down, and she sneaks out the window. And so you get these characters that are too opposing and come together. And to me, this is one of the things I think it resonates for me, like universally, is this idea that you could have put this story in space. You could have put this story in, underground. What drives it are the characters and the emotions. Like Gord kind of pointed out, we get these silly kind of takes and then these heavy moments. And the fact that we can't pigeonhole it, to me, is the beauty of it, because that's life. Our life is this mess of goodness and craziness and calm and peace and all these things. And that's what this feels like to me. And that emotion just resonates through those characters with it. Just such a lovely part of it. But I love how he brings these two characters that are from different sides of the tracks, right? And he brings them together and gets them into what's going to, seemingly be a lifelong bond to a certain extent. Yeah.
Well, your life must be more exciting than mine, Blackpool. Because I do feel like breaking it down as we think about it, as far as we've gotten, there are two opposing main stories, which is the love triangle, which, by the way, Eric, Longbox Review, who left that question about and has done a lot of good comments here, is a friend of mine, and he does a great podcast about comics called Longbox Review. So I recommend that. But so we've got the love triangle, and we've got the whole Parker girls and crime conspiracy story, which, might be accurate given all that we're learning lately in the news. But it's they're two very different stories, right? And that is maybe the center of my whiplash. On top of that, he's changing styles and everything. But I think so far, what is pushing me through the story is the love triangle. I'm at my core, I'm more interested in that love triangle. And of course, the difference between Francine and Kachu is highlighted by that crazy Parker girl story that is part of Kachu's life. So Kachu's version of the type of person she is way extreme, right? And it is an interesting, fun story, but it is way more pulpy. I mean, like Mrs. Parker is almost like Fu Manchu or something, some sort of evil mastermind who has her tentacles and everything. At least until she doesn't anymore, but not to spoil it too much. So what fascinates me about the love triangle is it lasts so long. I don't know where the whole thing is going, but I'm guessing it's lasting at least through their middle-aged life, and I don't know if it goes beyond that. And so that makes it kind of a unique love triangle too. I don't know if I've read that many stories about love triangles or quadrangles, as it may expand, that last a lifetime. And I think that's a really interesting concept. There were a number of times in the story where I thought, now Kachu and Francine have consummated their love, but then later we'll flash forward and I'll realize, no, they didn't. and that maybe was another kind of moments where I did not follow where Terry Moore was thinking. And maybe, on a second read, I'll get it better that way. But anyway, I love the love triangle. I do have to say that I still have a lot of questions about David. And and again, people who've read the whole thing might know more, but because it seemed like he was basically a spy when he first falls in love with Kachu. And that is never, in the 750 pages that I've read so far, never addressed for more than a moment or two. And, so that's sort of a niggling thing in my head. Because that's a weird aspect of the love triangle also, which
David will be a revelation. That's all I will say.
Yeah.
So
the other bizarre thing. Sorry, one more thing. I was reading someone's review of the series, and they were viewing it for better or worse through political correctness point of view, and they pointed out that David and Mrs. Parker were Asian, and I did not know that. I did not pick up on that. I probably read that after having read about 500 pages, and they did not approve of that because of racial stereotyping, they thought. But I don't know.
It's the first time I've heard that. I didn't know that was an issue for some readers.
But I did not, because Mrs. Parker and the way he draws everybody, it's hard to tell that someone is Asian or not. But anyway, I
think David's character's quite interesting because, again, for me, there's a clear split between those first sort of 3 issues and what kind of happens after that kind of point. So for me, I feel like David was written as, in those first 3 issues, just a side character who happened to be at that college, type thing.
Right.
But then after the fact, they've kind of written in that he was asked to go to that college. I don't think there was anything beyond that. He wasn't told to specifically spy on Kachu or interact with her for any specific means. Like, that's something he took upon himself. But he was asked to go to that college, maybe just to have a presence there, maybe just to report on any, interesting things that were going on around Kachu in case they needed to kind of step in. Because although the Parkers, want to control Kachu and their various Parker girls, they also want to protect them. So they are always keeping an eye on them, even if they're not necessarily going to, pull them in or try and control them. So he might have been there just to be like, well, we need eyes on the ground wherever she is, just, to have somebody there kind of thing. But for me personally, I didn't really like that change the first time that I kind of read it through. I liked him being this third party to everything, where you had, their relationship of, the 2 girls and the home life type thing. You had the Parker girls, and then you had David, who was this like observer, if you like, and I quite liked that aspect early on. And the more that he gets tied to Darcy and things that kind of happen there, although reluctant and not actually involved as such, even though his family tied to these things. I think that's interesting in how his character, sort of changes and develops over the kind of time period, because for a while as well, he was kind of just a tag along to the girls. He would, be there whenever they needed somebody to be a shoulder to kind of cry on. He was there for them to paint whenever he needed some, he didn't really hold down a job or anything like that. So it makes sense that if he's from a wealthy background and things, that's why he had this free time. So, these things kind of came together, however accidental or however planned after the fact, like it does kind of work. And I actually think this time round, although Kachu is probably the standout character that I was kind of following the closest the first time round, I think it would probably be David this time, because I really find his character arc quite interesting.
Yes, I agree.
I mentioned something about David. One of the things the second time through now that I really enjoyed about reading this was David Chase does the same thing with The Sopranos that Terry Moore does here with David and Darcy. He takes somebody making money in nefarious means and somebody close to them who critiques those nefarious means, but also benefits from that. And he had that with Carmela and Tony Soprano, where Carmela was often at odds with how Tony was making his money, and there was this ethical underpinning to it. And now David's this Christian and still benefiting from his connections with Darcy to a large extent and his upbringing, and yet has issues in this ethical. So it's not played out as much as it is in The Sopranos, but I saw the similarity there to how he creates this tension between them that I didn't pick up the first time. And I really enjoyed that kind of like the ethical component in there.
It's interesting. Yeah, Matthew, you mentioned the David's faith. When it was revealed that he was a Christian and he uses that, now that I found that unusual, because normally you don't see that in a comic, and it ends up being actually very important to his character.
Yeah,
like Highland G mentioned earlier, he will be a revelation as this story moves forward, and his relationship with his sister is also very peculiar, and also their background. And David, again, when you meet him in the museum when he sees Kachu, and then Kachu says something interesting, I think, with her tampon, and so when you meet him and the way he's drawn, he's kind of a nerdy looking guy, right? Kind of like a little Matt Murdock. So to speak. And but as you learn more about him, he does certain things, and you're thinking, wait a minute.
Oh, it froze up, or
and
there.
there.
Oh, did you lose me again?
You're back.
You're good.
You're back now.
Okay, I'm sorry. So it's just like, who is he, right? And so there's a mystery to him, and he ends up becoming a very interesting character because at first you're thinking, why is he here, right? But he's more than just maybe he's a spy. What is he? But he's definitely going to be something quite interesting. But his Christian faith is very important to him. And the way Moore utilizes it is wonderful. Yeah. Very wonderful.
Yeah, the other... Sorry, just quickly, the other interesting thing that I would note on David, which are two really quick things that I kind of glossed over on, is that when he gets shot in the hand at one point, he doesn't actually notice that he was shot in that hand until he sees it.
Yeah.
And then there's also a sort of throwaway comment at one point that I think they're looking over FBI files or something like that, and they say that he used to be a young gang leader in the town at one point before he was 18 or something along those lines. And those two things are something that like really throw up a back sort of story into his character, because we've never really seen a violent side to him.
We haven't even seen him be much of a leader. So I think as far as I read, I saw one mention of leading gangs. And yeah, so it's a whole hidden side of his personality that maybe will show up some more as we go along.
Yeah, it all depends on who has read till, which I think is another thing that I'm enjoying about the series is as I read and it reinvents things that you've seen before, and we mentioned the play right at the beginning. There's almost nothing that's a throwaway. Every single gesture, and that's either someone having a plan or someone being very good at retconning things that they have put in earlier, which I think both of them are signs of great writing. I mean, there's no superiority between those two. But when it comes to David, I have to admit that when I was reading the initial things, David's character was the one that I had the most I wasn't that interested, because I was like, why is this person here? Why is this? So in fact, I thought that the revelations and the twists that come about as far as David's story is concerned worked for me, because they were like, okay, that explains it. That explains why he would still hang out with them, or why he would come back the next morning after having gone through this the previous evening. Why would he make so much effort to help these girls? They're both like, they're coming across as two mad women, who've got their own shenanigans and who are just going to get him into trouble after trouble. And I think there is, I think one of the conclusions that I reached was that this isn't a slice of life romance that's putting a whole bunch of pulp elements into it. This is actually a pulp story trying to present it as a slice of life. It's trying to be a grounded pulp story, but it's very much, and I think it's pulp romance also, because that scene with David in the rain confessing his love after getting punched and falling in the mud, it was fantastic, because I was like, surely Mr. Moore knows what he's doing here. He's completely aware of this in the rain declaration stuff. And it seems to me that for me, there were so many elements in the book that I was just like, this is a cliche, but it's being reinvented, or it's being repurposed, and it's being arranged into this universe, that I started kind of developing an appreciation for it as a pulp story rather than it be I don't know if that makes sense, but
it's a fascinating idea. I'll have to think about it.
Yeah, because it can't be a realistic story that asks you to take this evil empire and big six conglomerate. I mean, I know that reality today has made the worst Pulp Fiction seem tame in comparison, but it can't be that this is supposed to be played straight. I think what it's saying is that even in these pulpiest of stories, you can have this real human love, you can have this real human tragedy, you can have these connections, and then you've got these invented, it's almost like, to me it seemed, and this is where I think this series has been so interesting to me, it seemed like Terry Moore is setting himself challenges, to say that, how am I going to get out of this, or how am I going to make this feasible, or make this something that a reader can accept, and you will have something that's absolutely ridiculous, and then he does break your heart. So he kind of grounds the pulp is the conclusion I'm coming to now having gone through like about 1,000 pages, because there's stuff happening which I'm like, okay, I've seen it in that movie, I've seen it in that TV show, I've seen it, it's like, and these are sort of classic tropes, but each one of them is getting a little bit of a subversion. The subversion being the love story, the subversion being the slice of life, everyday emotion, and the sort of depression, the pain, all of that, which pulp usually doesn't want to deal with.
The comic, in a sense, is bit Modesty Blaze, right?
Yeah.
Modesty Blaze is not your conventional comic strip. And when Modesty's like 17, she's already a crime lord, so to speak. And she's got an interesting relationship with her partner, Willie. But that's not you expect James Bond. You're not going to get James Bond with Modesty Blaze, I find. And then when you read the Modesty Blaze novels by O'Donnell, they have much more depth than the Fleming books, in my opinion. I've read a handful of the Fleming books, and they don't compare to the O'Donnell stuff with Modesty Blaze. That also defies your convention of what a spy story should be. And so this is the way it is with this comic, and it's just, I don't know how, you're right, I don't know how to categorize this thing. And that can be one of the frustrations for new readers, right? Is to the ones who need that,
Yeah. I mean, I think things that you can't quite classify can be very polarizing. And even as much as I love Love and Rockets, there are parts of Love and Rockets which just make me disconnect. Whereas at least in the 1,000 pages so far, I've been like, this is weird and bizarre, but I'm still reading. I'm not disconnecting. I'm still turning the pages. And to Highland G's point also, I'm not a big fan of huge blocks of prose in the middle of my comics. I'm a bit of I was just like, I want to get back to the comics. But this is one of those places where the prose and the poetry and the song lyrics didn't bother me as much. And again, I don't know why. I mean, there's something about the typography. I think there's, one of the hidden skills in this book is also the lettering, where the lettering is part of what makes it so unclassifiable, because sometimes it's like Archie Comics lettering, and sometimes it's like Crime Comics lettering, and sometimes it's big balloon letters, and you'll have sound effects that are very cartoonish, or you'll have things that are very gritty. But there's so many different types of lettering styles in here, and they capture the mood so differently. I thought it was interesting that I wasn't just quickly turning through the prose to get to the comics. And I thought that the prose parts of it were also very adroitly done, where some of them would be little recaps. Because Sleepy, one of the things I was thinking is I'm reading it in this omnibus, and I'm reading 200, 300 pages at a go, but people were reading this over years. So it's very cool that when you get this story, you get a little noir story about this police detective, but that also recaps for you something that has probably happened a couple of years in the past now for the single issues readers. But it recaps it for you in a different format, or it'll give you another character's point of view on a scene you've already seen. So it's not just a recap, it's also a new character being introduced, or insight into a different part of the world. And you get the same, it's like Rashomon, you get the same thing from someone else's angle, and you connect it to what you've seen before. And now you're getting, and I thought that kind of stuff was so skilled that it was overcoming my resistance to reading a block of prose, or to reading, a song lyric. Like, it's going to get connected, and then it's going to come back, and it's going to have a callback that's going to magnify it, which I thought was, once again, part of the skills that I was admiring. And that was, I think, lowering my resistance, or lowering my, like, what the hell is going on? Or how can you go from here to here? You're like, well, I mean, as long as it's enjoyable, you don't care that much, I think. I think that's, I think in lesser hands, this would have been unbearable. And that's why the fact that I don't find it unbearable is part of what's making me go, there's something here that is unlike anything else I've read in comics.
I'd love to know if he does go by instinct or thinks these things through. I have a sense. So I've watched a number of videos with him in the past. You know, he has his own channel. Terry Moore does, and in those videos, he very much has a Mr. Rogers Neighborhood. I don't know if everyone's familiar with that around the world, but that kind of personality that's just very calm and soothing and not very intense. But obviously, he is very intense underneath to have done these comics. So I'm just fascinated by that idea of how the creative process works. But I sort of am leaning to thinking he's doing this stuff instinctively and letting his, you know, inner self just sort of come out on the page that maybe he doesn't normally express in regular life.
Yeah, one of the things I thought about with like these it's because really a lot of some of it's data dumps, right? We're getting a lot of data, and he's got all this information he's got to get to us somehow. And I feel like since it's this creator-owned project, he's running out of his own studio. If he had all the time in the world, those pros might be more issues added in. But and this is my own thought, I'm envisioning him under a time constraint of having to get these arcs out in some kind of timely fashion from a small, independent, doing it all himself press. And so he's got to make these decisions on like, well, I can't draw another 4 issues to get this point, to get this across. So I got to dump some info here. This is the best way to do it. And just making some editing choices around that. That's how I envision it laying out. Whether that's true or not, I have no idea.
Yeah, I mean, I've had those same questions before as well, but I've also felt like it doesn't matter because at the end of the day, it only matters what he's executed on the page. Because I feel, I like, especially when it comes to the things like the prose, like I think he's a good prose writer. It's not like when people try to write prose, you know, even people who are good comics writers, they don't necessarily write good novelistic stuff, you know, or when they're trying to do, including people I really like Alan Moore. You know, I don't like all his prose blocks in there, but a lot of the Terry Moore prose that I was reading over here, I was like, I'm reading it, you know, I'm still getting by it. Hold on, I'm going to put up look at those blocks over here.
Just for people who haven't read it to see what the blocks of prose might look like. It is good page design there, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
And I think different prose pieces, he's taking on different styles. Like sometimes it's almost like a romance novel. Sometimes it's more like an espionage or, you know, what have you.
But he's doing decent romance prose, you know, or he's doing decent noir prose.
He's doing it well, whichever style he chooses. And I think he does although it helps as a recap, he also embeds interesting insights into the characters, into the prose. So I read the first prose or two and I pondered, will I skip the prose in the future? But then I realized, no, I have to read all the prose because there's valuable stuff in there.
He did have something, something changed for him. I saw an interview with him and asking him about the destiny of Kachu and Francine. And he said he had something in mind for them. And he made it seem rather grim, suggesting when I saw this that one of them wasn't going to make it. But he said, then September the 11th happened. And after September the 11th, that story that he had in mind, he put it aside. And so the interviewer was like, what? So what were you going to do? And he just left it at that, right? And so, so I guess to the question as to, you know, is he thinking this through? Is he making it up as he goes along? Does he have some grand design? At least he did prior to September the 11th regarding the fate of these characters or the fate of one of them. And it looked like it was going to be a pretty bad ending, maybe, or something. I don't know. But that's what he was suggesting. But he wanted to give something different after September the 11th.
Yeah. I mean, I can see that. I mean, to me, whether someone has a grand plan or not, it's like kind of an abstract question, because at the end of the day, I've seen people have big plans and then not do a very good job executing them. And then I've seen people who don't have any plan, or who say they never had a plan, create things that hang together in a way that you're like, there's no way this could not have been planned out. It's so well thought out. It's so well connected. So I do think, I get the sense that sometimes people might reread their work and then find elements in them that inspire continuation of the work. So you read something that you wrote 3 years ago, and you're like, so like one of the things was that in comedic form, whenever Kachu wakes up, she destroys her alarm clock. And in the first few stories that I was reading, I was like, this is the 4th alarm clock that she is absolutely destroying, and then there's some poem that she writes, like, I don't know, like 400 pages in which she's like, it's poetic, in where she says something like, and that's why I've destroyed so many alarm clocks. And I'm like, hold on, did he have this line written ahead of time, or did he write this because now he's made her destroy 5 or 6 alarm clocks that we have seen, and now it's become a thing for him to harness and put in there. And I think that's just an example of things like with David. And, like, was David always supposed to be a spy? Or, it seems like, of course, he is meant to be. The way that the story unfolds, there's no way that he couldn't have been. But you never know. But I think what is impressive to me is how he makes it make sense, no matter how ridiculous it is, which is, I think, my large theme for my judgment of this whole comic. Is just like, none of this should be making sense. None of this should be holding together. But for some reason it does, because they're paying enough attention to character. The author is paying enough attention to, making it feel real. So even when it has these drastic twists and turns, it still seems like it's part of the same story. And that is, I think, what I'm admiring, is that, again, that balancing act of taking everything that you've thrown on the page and making it waterproof, which, I don't mean to say there are no plot holes or there are no questions that may come up, but it feels like someone's in charge and someone's been thinking this whole thing through, when in reality that might not be the case. But that's the grand illusion. That's the writing trick.
I do think it could be made a little bit more obvious sometimes, though, when there's jumping back and forths in time, or flashbacks and forwards. Like, sometimes the art doesn't stand out enough as different. So you will realize, maybe, like, once you've read that whole section, oh wait, that was a flashback, or like that was an imaginary scene, or whatever it kind of was. But when you first go to it, you can, or I found that there's quite a few times where there'll be like a jarring moment where you're like, wait, this doesn't line up. So is this before or after, or where am I at? Because there's no, like, yesterday or whatever, or just like something to tell you that the time's changed.
And in some of the issues, I'm guessing there are issues, we jumped through 3 different timelines back and forth in ways that I had to go back and sort it out after I read it. My daughter flipped through the book yesterday, just looking at it, and said, maybe I prefer color comics. And the only area where I would like this, because I like black and white comics, where color might help, is giving you a sense of like we're in a different place in time by shifting your color choices or something. Because he doesn't. But sometimes his style shifts all the time, right? But it's not always indicating a change in time.
Well, I mean, I might be the only person.
You could have like a drastic haircut change, but it's not actually indicating a time change. It's just the next issue.
Yeah, it doesn't bother me.
But then other times there'll be a drastic time cut change, but actually their hair looks the same, and it's like, okay, I've got to kind of like juggle this,
right?
Or like we jump to a future scene that we don't know if it's the future or not.
Yeah, it's a little tough.
I mean, to me, maybe I'm the only one, but to me, that's okay, because that confusion, that little bit of confusion, is sort of like part of the joy in some of these. I think it's very intentional, and it's kind of the way that movies have dream sequences, so you can eat your cake and have it too. You will have this person get shot, but they're not really shot. You get to do it. You get to have the effect on the audience of seeing that person get shot. And then you're like, oh no, that person was just imagining it. They didn't actually shoot their boss. This is just what they wish they would be able to do to their boss as they get chewed out in the office. So we've seen those kind of things, but they've become such shorthand that we can almost predict that, okay, that's not going to be true. So when you read it in this comic and you're just like, oh my God, has she left her? And you're like, no, this is actually 5 years before she met her or something like that. I like that. I like that realization, I like that little momentary confusion where that's where I also think about writing as sophisticated, where you don't have to spell out everything or you don't have to feed your reader every single thing, every single step of the way, allowing them a little bit of vertigo, allowing them a little bit of being lost is also adding texture to the reading experience and having them go, oh my God, have they broken up? Oh, no, this is before, this is before that happened. Or wait, are they back together? No, they're just remembering a time when they were together. Oh man, I thought they were back together. I was about to get happy and I was wondering what, have I missed something? I know I haven't missed something. I like that in many, not just in this comic, in many comics that do it well. I think it's part of it, but I also know that there are, there are times when people don't do it well. So I think it's all a question of whether you found it to be something that takes you out of the story or makes you get more into the story. I think that's what it would come down to.
I think it depended on how quickly I realized where I was supposed to be. Like if I realized after a few panels, oh, okay, this is in the past or whatever, then it's fine. Like I don't mind it that I'm a few panels off. But if it took me like a page of these jump back and forths to realize what was going on, then it might irk me a bit more.
There was a scene where I suddenly thought, oh, did Francine all along have a baby or a child that's been living with her mother? and that's been like part of the context of the entire story from the beginning. And then I realized, no, this is a flashback, like a flash forward.
Yeah.
And that was my biggest moment of confusion, where I suddenly rewrote the whole story in my head for a few pages before then I realized, no, that's not the case.
And that's one of those reasons why I think you kind of have to think of it as a lot of short stories in a universe rather than one continuous kind of thing, because that way
like
you can stop it.
Story.
Yeah, and you can also start and stop at any point you want because you're just getting like a bite of that universe. It doesn't really matter if you have the complete story or not really, even though it does obviously flesh things out more. In theory, you could jump in, midway through and not know the start, and it might make the story more interesting. I don't know.
I don't mind it. I liked it. It's like some of the European movies I like, or some of the Latin American writers they'll like, where they'll be describing it's in a novel, right? And there'll be a scene that's being described, but then through one sentence you're in the past, and then you have to go. It's a subtle shift, but if you don't read it carefully, at least in the book, you're going to be lost. But I like that. I like how that goes. And so I like how Moore is able to do this here. One thing about his writing process that I just remembered in an interview that I saw with him, he said he does make an effort to make a scene. He want the reader care about that scene. And he gave an example. He gave an example of a little boy who's walking to school with his backpack, and he has his lunch in the backpack. But then he's assaulted by some boys who want his lunch. So they beat him up and they take his lunch. So it makes the reader go, that's too bad. But then he says, well, what if you do this instead? Same scenario, but now the reader has this knowledge. That little boy's mother is dying of cancer. She only has a few months to live. And every day she packs his lunch because she knows that he only has a few more months of doing this. And this particular day, when he gets beat up, she puts a note in his lunchbox that says, I love you. Now suddenly it's a different scene. It's a different impact for the reader. And the little boy never saw that note. And then his mother shortly after dies. And that's the sense that I get from this comic whenever I read some of these scenes that he's doing. And that's why I guess these juxtapositions in time, they do that, forward or backwards. And they are a challenge, that is true, but I like it. I really do, because it generally adds to the pathos of the story.
Well, and I think all of the confusing bits are easier to take once you're already sort of bought into the whole story, right? You even though I was slightly confused, I still want to keep reading and figure out all of this stuff. And those flashbacks and forwards in the end feed in more to my interest in the whole love triangle and how it progresses over time.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm not angry that he did it. I do kind of wish it was a little easier to tell when those things happen.
No, but I agree that all of us here, I may add, are experienced comic readers. And we have this issue. It's an issue for new readers who are just, who are just used to standard comic book storytelling. So this could be a problem why for new readers to actually be engaged with this, because they're not used to this. We're all, we've been doing this for a while, reading these things. And even, we have this problem, but it doesn't really turn us off, but it'll probably turn off somebody who's new.
That's good.
Well, I got a question for the two new readers. So For the Love of Comics and Damien, what did you guys think of Freddy?
I was hoping we would get to Freddy eventually.
I would like to talk about Freddy. So I'd like to hear from you guys first, being the new, doing the new readers.
Well, I thought he was a throwaway character that we wouldn't see again after the first little arc, right? Because he was just a stereotypical bad male character. So I love the fact that he keeps reoccurring and that we learn more about his obsession. And I found that, and then I found, although I never thought he was a good guy, I found him a more interesting character. And that obsession of his does ring true to me, right? Originally, his behavior didn't totally ring true to me, because he spends a whole year trying to get laid. and then, is immediately a sleazebag with other women and stuff. So that at first felt wrong to me, but then his character came into focus later. And I love the way his look changed all the time. And that was a nice indicator of time passing. So and I'm hoping to see more of Freddy as it moves on. He's kind of a counterpoint to Kachu and Francine and David in a very interesting way.
He's a riot, absolute riot.
Yeah. And I think I had this impression that, he's exactly as you, Damien, like he's a throwaway character. He's supposed to represent this sleazy boyfriend that she should not be with. And then I was like, he's coming back. Are they going to redeem him? Are they going to make him be something? And I like the fact that he keeps coming back and he stays this sleazy, terrible guy. I think that is good writing over there. I think the temptation would have been that if I'm going to bring him back, let me make him, let me add texture. And and they do add more texture to him, but he never becomes a good guy. He never becomes a sympathetic guy. He's, and he's so consistently irritating and so consistently misogynistic in his own way, even though he's getting older and he's got, in the way he treats his wife and all of this thing. I love the fact that he continues to be a jackass. I think that's good writing right there. I think it's true. Longbox reviews saying that he hated Freddy, but he does do surprising things. I agree. I think they're surprising, but they're still consistent with him being a jackass. They're not like a complete revelation or a complete subversion the way that you would, you would think that, if you take this one character and bring them back, maybe I'm going to, evolve them. He doesn't seem to evolve to me without it being a cardboard character. He definitely feels three-dimensional, but I like the fact that he's still dislikable constantly. Constantly. Like, I can't think of a single time when he becomes likable. Like, even when you think he's going to commiserate, he's still looking to get laid, or he's still, hoping that he's got a chance or something like that. That's why he's doing it. And it becomes clear. Like, and that's one of those confusions. Like, for 2 panels, you might think, oh, he's going to show a softer side of himself. And he's like, nope, he's still the same old Freddy.
He's just no shame, no matter what.
Yeah.
Those whole scenes with the Polaroids and the string bikini with Francine and Chuck, and I mean, there's just so much good stuff with Freddy. Freddy is one of those people that really became just endearing to me as the because he brings in that sense of lightness in the middle of some of the heavy stories. Freddy shows up on the page, and you're like, "What's gonna happen now?" Like, I'm rubbing my hands together, like something funny, something's good gonna happen when Freddy's there.
So basically, for the readers who are not familiar with Freddy, Freddy is Francine's boyfriend when we meet him in the story. It's fiancé, but Francine has abstained from having sex with him because of the past experience with men. After having sex with him, basically the men change. So when she meets Freddy, they're not going to have sex. So it's been almost a year, and he's really frustrated. He's pretty pissed off, and then he ends up cheating on her, and that's again early on in the story. And just when she's ready to give herself up to him, she catches him in an affair. But this is Freddy. He's just utterly, like all of you have said here, he doesn't change. He's consistent, and that's part of the appeal of this. Because whenever he appears, at this point, you're thinking, okay, we know what we're going to get with Freddy. Unlike the other characters, you're not sure what you're going to get with those characters. So you're going to learn something new about him. But with Freddy, he's Freddy. Goatee or no goatee, he's still looking out for number 1, and that's him.
Yeah, one of the other things I like with Freddy is that he's basically that panel you showed where it said Francine when she breaks in that opening arc.
Oh yeah.
And so Freddy denied sex for the year, and then he hears from his friend Chuck that Chuck was with Francine at one point, and how wild Francine was in the bedroom, and that just ups the level of what Freddy wants. Yeah,
that blew my mind.
Yeah,
that was a whole new side of Francine that we were seeing. But the other thing is, Chuck did not break up with Francine after they had sex.
Exactly.
So Francine's perception of how sex works isn't even accurate.
Yeah,
right. And I thought that was very clever too, is to say that just because Francine has said it doesn't mean it's true, And I think Chuck is, the most proof of that is to say that she broke up with me because she met you. Like, I'm the one who got dumped because she wanted to move on to somebody else. So it's a complete reversal. And that's I think early on in the story to say that not everything that Francine says, and even when she's having her fights with Kachu, what I liked about them is that, again, they could have been this incredible high melodrama, what have you, but there's this feeling within us as readers, I think, that both of you are not completely genuine, or both of you are not, even though you seem to be speaking your mind so powerfully, you have your own stories, and you're making these things fit the stories, which is, again, even when Kachu is talking to David about painting and art, and it seems like it's this powerful thing about art. I'm like, well, some part of it is a little bit of bullshit. Some part of it is a little bit of what you need to say about art, and in order to get your way, or in order to have your view, and you're not necessarily thinking of David's view, or you're putting words into the other person's mouth. That's what I appreciated about this, is it's not black and white, even from a single character's point of view. Right. But Longwalk's review asks, what are your thoughts on Casey? And I think that's an interesting character to present as a counterpoint to Freddy. Well, because they're a couple, first of all, but it might be different.
It seems like she's about to change where we kind of left off. So I'm not sure what to think about her yet.
Was Casey the rectangle you were alluding to earlier?
I assume so.
Yes. I was thinking about that. But also Casey, even from the Hawaiian wedding sequence of when she's getting married to Freddy and what we see of her later, I think there's been a little bit of a change, because she was presented as a complete ditz, maybe, or like playing into a certain kind of blonde stereotype, maybe. And then you have this other level of slight, depth, or at least emotional like resonance. Like I can see things even if I don't. And that's some kind of the way Francine also talks sometimes. She like, I might not be smart, but I can feel things genuinely. And David and Kachu, you guys are so smart, and you guys talk about art and philosophy in a way that I can't, but that doesn't mean what I feel is not valid. And I think Casey kind of presents herself in the same way to the reader, to say that, oh, I've been shown to you as this ditzy woman who's barely able to figure out what you guys are talking about. But actually, that doesn't mean you can ignore me or treat me in this way. And that's quite, I found that quite affecting.
Yeah, the other thing, one of the things I really like about Casey too is, what she brings in is this, human idea of, when we get what we want, we still want what we can't have. Because Casey comes in and she's going to give it up in the bedroom like there's no tomorrow. She's the wild one. And Freddie doesn't want anything to do with her pretty much, and is still fascinated with what he can't have in Francine. And so, like I said, I can relate to all these characters in these different ways, these things we go through. And Terry Moore just really taps into like some of these emotions and uses the characters to kind of bring them up in us. I love that part of it.
This part of the discussion makes me particularly wish we had the female member of our panel able to show up. And would you give this book to a girlfriend or wife? I'm not sure my wife would like it.
It's got a huge female readership because I have a lot of the
heard,
and I have a lot of the singles and the letters pages. Many of them are women. They just love this thing, and it's like the Neil Gaiman effect with Sandman. It's got a huge readership of men and women, but especially women, in this comic. I mentioned another Texas writer is Larry McMurtry. And over the decades, many women that I knew who had read Lonesome Dove and his other books, HUD, Horseman Passed By, The Last Picture Show and such, they like McMurtry because they say he writes women in a very convincing way. We like it. And so I think this book would be really good for women. But it'd be good to have a female perspective here.
I think the other thing too is like, that the whole scene, at one point Francine's looking for a job and she goes to work for the ad agency, right?
Oh, yeah.
And there's all this stuff around male chauvinism and sexism in there that I think women would appreciate. I'm guessing that, some of the women I know would appreciate, like, oh, it's being highlighted. It's being shown, like, these two powerful men, the guy who owns the company gets in the elevator, doesn't know that Francine's there. They can't see her, and start talking about how she's overweight and fat and doesn't deserve the job and just all this other stuff. So he really writes in between that and between like Kachu's comments about men throughout are just great. There's the one scene early on where she draws them all as little like 5-year-old kids. And she's like, oh, David, you're an idiot. He starts crying, and Francine's all upset. Oh, no, he's king of the idiots. And she kind of rails on men to a certain extent. I really think that like at least the women in my life, I think, would appreciate his commentary on the male chauvinistic side that he brings up in this. Yeah.
Yeah.
Moore does it so well. It doesn't come across didactic. It doesn't come across as I hate this word, woke. Right? Yeah. He's never been accused of that. He hates his own sex. He hates men himself, He's never been accused of that. I mean, in the sense that, not the way other people are, right? That's why it's so effective with this book. You don't get that at all, Yeah. I'm sorry to interrupt, but
no, that was well said, Gore. That's a good point.
And I also think that there's this aspect of, how men treat women and that. But I also think the reason I would give it to my wife, and I think that she might enjoy it actually, is for the complexity of the writing, the fact that the women are not treated as a single type or a single thing in itself. Like there's all these sides to it. But I also think that the friendship between women is very interestingly portrayed in this, that it does not have to be sexual, but it can be love, and it can be this closeness, and that I don't think I've seen a lot of comics handle it in such a complex way. So there's the way that how men treat women, but there is the how women treat women part of this story that I find to be quite interesting and quite well done. And I would love to I would give it to women just to see what their take on that is to say, what do you think about the relationship between Francine and Kachu? What do you think about their friendship? What do you think about their love? Like, how do you think that's being portrayed? Does that feel real to you? Because to me it feels very real, but it also feels very unclassifiable in its real way. It's not the way fiction usually treats it. You might have like best friends, or you might have lovers, but somewhere in between, this kind of this intimacy that is portrayed, I thought was for me very interesting, and I'd love to know what women think about that relationship.
Yeah, and this passes the Bechdel test. And this was before, I think, probably the Bechdel test might have even been out. I don't know what year it came out in, but this is one of those that the women have their own ongoing life outside of the situation with the men for large chunks of it or parts of it, right? And so, Damien, I know you've read a lot of science fiction. I've read a lot of science fiction. That often doesn't happen in storytelling.
Sometimes there's no female characters at all.
Exactly. And so we get these female characters that have their own life and that feel fleshed out and organic, and that don't need the men in order for them to be who they are in the story and to drive the story. And that says a lot to me.
See, I never even
passes. Sorry, I was just going to say this passes the Bechdel test on page 2. So both the characters are named on page 1, and on page 2 they have a conversation which doesn't involve a man. It's about the play, and it's about putting that on. Sorry, Highland G.
Sorry, I just, from the way that I kind of like took the characters in this, I never really took it as like, an example of, how men should or shouldn't treat women, or how women should or shouldn't treat men. The thing that I actually found interesting about it was that most of the characters, although maybe, connected through family or friendships or love or whatever the case may be, were all very much selfish for about 80% of what we read. Even if they were with someone, they were with someone because of what that gave them, how that made them feel, how they were stabilized, or whatever the case may be. And it wasn't really until the sort of tail end of what we read that there was certain sort of fights between, say, like Kachu and Francine, where Francine would point out, like, I'm not just here to basically be your thing to kind of sit on, and this information that you've hidden that's half your life, well, you know everything about me. And like similar things with like David, where David was giving almost everything to begin with, and then that kind of flipped on its head a little bit, and you find out that because David's tied to the greater kind of Darcy family, he knows all this stuff about Kachu that she now knows less about him, and she's put in the opposite situation kind of thing and has to kind of deal with that. So there's a lot of situational and background things that have made characters act the way they do to each other rather than gender, in my opinion.
The mystery of the characters here is that David knows a lot about Kachu, and Kachu is afraid that Francine's going to know everything about her, right? And then we learned that she does learn quite a bit. Then Francine doesn't like the way, she's uncomfortable with what Kachu has expectations of her, or the way she sees her, or the way she thinks she sees her in a very idealized form, especially when she paints her. And then Kachu has had a terrible experience, not just with men, but with humanity, including women. David's probably one of the few men, we don't know that much about her father, who's actually decent, or at least appears decent to her. And this is something maybe kind of new to her. Francine is extremely decent in the eyes of Kachu, but the way they all perceive each other, and then Kachu can understand why David cares for her. I mean, for why he's in love with her. And there's this, and that's what creates part of the problem, are expectations they have for each other, the way they see each other, the way they want, what they want from each other. And that creates a lot of conflict throughout this story, right? And it leads to, some separation issues that occur in this story, and for them to make decisions that normally probably wouldn't have made. But early on in the story, I wrote this down. It goes back to the beginning, right? It goes back to Damien's point: is how far ahead did he think about this when he wrote those first few issues? But quote, "If anything I've learned, you can't always go home. You can't always be warm inside. That without love, we're never more than strangers in paradise." And that is early on in the play, right? And that is said later, that it's alluded to when the girls are separated initially, when Kachu goes off and disappears from her life the first time. But yeah, just a wonderful mystery with these characters and where they're going to take you.
That play is not a real play, is it?
I don't think so.
No.
I haven't looked that up. Did anybody look that up?
I think most of like the music and stuff's all made up, as far as I can tell. I don't think there's anything referenced to an actual person.
No.
Yeah, the pop songs, all of the pop star, then he appears on TV and he's the brother of Francine's husband.
Yeah, I mean, the only stuff that's like actual
I don't know
references
what
if there's like music in the background of Kachu, or it might be like Van Halen or something. But
yeah, I don't think it's a real play, but
they'll just have the random lyric.
But there is a thing in the future when they come back to that scene where he's just like, what does this even mean? This doesn't mean anything. so I think that's also kind of funny. They're like, here is this deep, meaningful thing, and the entire series gets its title from that. And then you can sit down to unpack it and still conclude that I don't understand. What does this mean? Why are we strangers in paradise?
See, what I found more interesting was the I think it's in the later sort of like school section when they kind of like re-go over it, but it's when Kachu gets up and kind of like recites her poem to the class type thing.
Yeah,
like I feel like that's hugely insightful to her character, because it's talking about this mask I wear, how I put this persona on, how I want people to perceive me, how I want to perceive others, how I've been wronged and I'm going to right that wrong, but this mask can't be taken off until my weapon's on your grave, or something along those lines.
Yeah.
But it's such a dark but so insightful, deep moment that we kind of get in there to her. And I think that for me is a bigger summation of a part of the story than the sort of Strangers in Paradise is more of a maybe metaphor.
May I read? Oh, it's here.
That's a great point about that poem.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Do you mind if I read it? Yeah, it's here. Is that okay?
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. And again, this is one of the early scenes where Francine is sitting behind her, and she says, "This mask I wear, you gave to me, one winter night beneath the trees. It's black and blue and shrouds my life, surrounds my eyes and blinds my sight. This mask I wear pretends I'm here, and hides me from the awful fear that you might find the heart of me, and take that too beneath the trees. This mask I wear to hide the pain. It's all I have to keep me sane. I just fell down. I'm told to tell. There are no words to stop this hell. This mask I pray to God for why he hates me so, to watch me die a little more. With every night, this man comes in and rapes my life. But little girls grow up, my friend, and learn the wicked ways of men. And this mask I wear comes off the day. This mask I wear lays on your grave."
Yeah, that's some amazing writing there.
Yeah. This is what I mean. I mean, like, the guy is good when he's writing poetry and when he's writing song lyrics and when he's writing prose. But that's also, I mean, that's again, one of those classic moments in which the kid who doesn't pay any attention in class and is hungover and is lying there and everyone has written them off, gets up and says something or does something which stuns the entire class, is again a thing that we've seen before, but it's done so beautifully and it's done so powerfully, and the poem itself is so great that it doesn't matter that it's a little bit of a cliche. In fact, it's relying on that cliche to sort of do that storytelling, because this is also where she tells her entire class about being abused at home. I mean, this is something that
Right.
we as the readers know has come up a couple of times when she has recapitulated it as an adult, saying this is what happened to me as a kid. But what you realize now is she told her teacher and her class as a kid what her stepfather was doing to her. And that's an incredible revelation when we as the readers already know that to be the case. It's just like it's that kind of texture, I think, that really puts this comics writing at that level that I'm finding it to be. That it's like you know what the thing is, and it's still breaking your heart. I mean, that's some achievement right there.
Well, he's adding new layers to it because she is letting the world know about it, and the world still does nothing about it.
Exactly.
Just like the scene where her mother doesn't want to do anything about it.
Horrendous.
And so her pain becomes that much deeper, and her trauma is, a deeper level. It makes you understand trauma at a greater level.
And then to play on that, then he counteracts that with these people that aren't being heard and their emotional this trauma that's going on, and then he counteracts it with, okay, the detective and Francine are in New York.
Mhm.
Or actually, before that, I think it's when Kachu gets actually shot at one point when she goes to wear a wire and do all that. She's doing it for Francine to get Francine out of there. David and Francine fly to Toronto to be with Kachu while she's going through the Emma dying with AIDS.
Yeah.
And so you have this other side where they're finding, like, what would you do for love? As friends, what would you do for love and the support? And so there's this really nice contrast between what one side looks like and what the other doesn't, which really speaks to me and just how he wrote.
Yeah. No, I think, sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask, like, because it has come up in the chat over here, and it's come up often on my channel, particularly when I did 31 Days of Comics and I was doing a great love story. And Strangers in Paradise got mentioned a couple of times over there, but a lot of people call it a great love story, one of the greatest love stories in comics, etc., etc. But it's not your romance story, it's a love story. And I think
there is a difference.
and I think that very often people conflate those two, but I think these are the kind of points that show us why it's a love story, because what that love means and what that love is that people are looking for. Again, it's a pulp story because, yes, there is the story of all of this, but it's also a person who was also a call girl, assassin, part of some, women's cult thing that's taken over the government by, betraying the mafia. And you're like, sure, whatever. I mean, like, put it all in there. I mean, and we've been talking for a while, and of course we can keep chatting, but even if we were thinking about it as a sort of encapsulation, I would be interested in what all of you think about the love aspect of this. Like, what makes it, like, would you first of all agree that it's a great love story? And which way is it a love story for you? It's just something I'm curious about.
Well, I am now questioning, is it saying that love does make things work? Because, again, up to the point that I've read, with these flash forwards and stuff, it looks like maybe it didn't work out. And maybe it will work out again, but so there's more layers to come, I suppose. And I don't know now whether, at first I thought the love was the great redeeming thing, and in the pulp sections it's always love that drives Kachu to take all these terrible risks and things. But and love also for that woman Emma is what drove her into the life of prostitution and becoming a mob assassin or whatever she was. So I'm a little confused about, and I'm looking forward to seeing more. But It seems like also love is kind of a complicated question mark.
I think in the sense with love being where it's unconditional, in the sense when you mentioned Emma, right?
Yeah.
Is that she as a teenager leaves, and she is for about a year, she's just living almost like a homeless person until this Emma person in LA, I think LA, takes her in. Now it seems like an act of good kindness on Emma, right? To get her back on her feet. But Emma has other plans for her. But nevertheless, Kachu still finds something good in Emma, something that basically will lead her years later to go visit her in Canada, where Emma's dying of AIDS. And Emma, in a way, replaced her mother, because apparently her mother was never much of a mother to her. In a way, her mother was pimping her out to her step. Let me rephrase that. The mother was unintentionally pimping out her own daughter for her husband because she didn't want to be alone. And she willfully ignores that her husband is doing these terrible things to her daughter. She refuses to acknowledge it's actually happening. And then she meets Emma. And then Emma, in another way, literally does pimp her out because she has an interest in her. And then she meets Darcy, and Darcy has another interest in her. But they're all very... Now, love is selfish by its nature. I think that's just a given, right? But at one point, you just don't do certain things if you really love somebody. And that's where Kachu comes. That's where Francine comes in, and David comes in. These are factors she's not used to. These are people, at least starting with Francine, is just as a good person, right? And with David, it's not clear. But at some point, it does seem like he is good. But certainly with love, it's the question of it, of how it actually works. And you have the dark side, the light side. But nevertheless, it's very, very, very complicated how you deal with it.
Yeah, to me, it seems like in this story, I don't know if it's redeeming. Sometimes it feels like the opposite of redeeming. It's like you're getting into all of this because of love, and it might have been easier or simpler if it wasn't actually there. But it's also about seeing somebody and seeing somebody for who they are or what they can be and what this is. But the biggest fights and the arguments and the friction also comes from people keeping things from each other and not showing, not being open, not being honest, and having secrets or lying, or even in some cases, I think there's one argument, the big fight that Kachu and Francine have at one point of time, where Francine says, "This is what you want me to be," like this idealization that your painting is representing rather than who I actually am. And so I think that's all part of that messy stuff about love. It's like, is love like seeing somebody for who they are, or is love seeing somebody for their potential? And if it is for their potential, then how much of that is a product of your own imagination, and how much of that is something you're foisting on somebody else, and how much of that can you take, and how much of that do you sort of push away and reject? I think it's complicated, and I like the story for being that complicated. I think sometimes I don't have a lot of patience for people just going around saying, "I love you," because it just stops having meaning after a while. It's just like you're just repeating it over and over again. So I like the fact that even though they do say that they do say "I love you" very often, they also complicate that matter by why, how that makes them behave, or what that makes them do, or what that makes them expect from each other. And then you think that things are okay, and then things go off the rails, and then you think that they're patching things up, and then they get worse. And it's all part, it's just the same kind of thing of like that pulp and that slice of life living right next to each other. And that's why I think it works that way, is because it feels like, love is sometimes this idyllic day at the beach, and sometimes it's a mob assassination hit gone wrong, and it can be that within pages of each other.
Well, you mentioned that fight scene. It's a very significant scene because it leads to a breakup. And then when Francine comes back, though, and she says to Kachu, "The truth is, you know me better than I know myself. I've been afraid to jump in the pond and go swimming. But you were already over the hills waiting for me. You changed me, Kachu. I thought I knew who I was, but I'm not who I thought I was, or thought I would be. Your paintings scare me because you see someone I don't know yet. And that goes into the potentialities, right, of what we see in others. It's
Yeah.
wonderful, but yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that came around.
Well, I think in some ways we're still just scratching the surface, but it has been a good 2 hours that we've been talking about what is the first half of this series because I think
Wait. Can I stop you? Not the first half. It was supposed to be the first third.
it's the first third.
Yeah.
Okay.
We
Well,
kind of discussed it. You mentioned the first half. We all read like a few less pages than you did, but
I think
Right,
you
right,
read the
right.
entire volume, whereas we read up to roughly page 750 or 800.
Oh, right. I think I read up to page 750 or something like that, but then I just kept going because I was like, there's only this little left, and I want to roll or something like that. So I did read the 1,000 pages, but you said that Blackpool, you mentioned how many issues there are there.
well, there's over 2,000. There's 107 issues total, so it's over 2,000 pages. So we divided it into like 3 live streams. Is what we're thinking, right?
Oh, okay. I thought we
Yeah.
were doing 2 live streams, which is probably why I got real enthusiastic about it.
That's all right. You're ahead. You get a gold star from the teacher. You're ahead for the next session. So yeah.
I think at one point we are going to have to get, well, at least I think, the heavy spoilers in the sense to basically, because at this point we have not revealed some things about the story, but not
Right.
not a lot, right?
We've danced around specifics, but
Yeah, we danced around a lot of specifics, which are just make you go, "Oh my God, what I just."
Well,
read.
yeah, you can't really discuss the next arc unless
Yeah.
at the start you mention a few things have happened.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well,
So I think this live stream was about what we think about the series so far in our readings, but also what makes it what it is, which might be something we enjoy or might be something we still try to figure out if we enjoy. Sleepy Reader, I think I'm with you, but I'm just on one like an inch onto the other side where I'm like, I don't get it, but the fact that I'm reading it
Right.
and I continue reading it, and the fact that my homework was 700 pages and I actually read 1,000, I think those are all they're indicative of something, where I'm just like,
Yeah.
it's really working for me. But I think in our next live stream, we might have to get into not just spoilers, but to say why exactly is it working for me, or why exactly is it not working for me. And I think from for our next 2 live streams, we might talk about things specifically. And what I'd love to do is for us to share like particular images or particular pages in which we, then we can sort of chomp down on a sequence or on particular things.
yeah.
Right,
Sounds wonderful.
That works with me. That works with me.
do we
Great.
want to each give some final thoughts, or
Yeah, let's start with Gore Vidal.
Thoughts on the series? It's certainly one of my favorite comics. I think it may be in the top 5 of my favorite comics. It was a complete surprise when I read this, based on what we discussed earlier, what I thought this was, and it ended up being something completely different of what the heck I had just read. It is a deeply moving piece of work, and this is why comics can be literature, even though people who are just prose readers who disdain the medium are just never going to get this. And it's a mystery of science why they think that. So I recommend for new readers just to get volume 1 or volume 2 of this, and go to the library if you don't want to spend money on it, and just give it a chance. And just be prepared to be really, really surprised, if not shocked, by what you're about to get. But it's something that stays with you, like a great piece of literature. Because I read this a while back, and I still think about these characters. I still think about them quite often, and they are with me, And so it's just I think it's a beautiful piece of work, and I'm glad a fellow Texan was one to put this thing out.
Thank you. Highland G.
And so to sum up my kind of, I guess, reread of this sort of section so far, I'd say that the first arc is as good as I remember it, and a real sort of slice of life story. But I think it's kind of verified for me a little bit that although this does cover a lot of slice of life things and somewhat do that sort of weekly touchstone type thing of covering things like, abuse or rape or any of these, various kind of things in a way that allows you to kind of enter it without being put off or, estranged from it. You might enter it from a humorous perspective or have other things going on around so that they can kind of cover these topics. I still think that one of the biggest thing that elevates this series is the sort of further delving into the Parker girls and how that kind of connects with the rest of the world and the world building that kind of comes off of that. And I really love a lot of the side characters that we haven't even really touched on much today, like Tambi and some of the other ones like that are kind of cornerstones to this, but don't actually get involved in the love triangles or the day-to-day.
Right. Blackpool?
Well, first, just thank you for Love of Comics and everybody on this panel for chatting. It's really great to have Damien and Gore with us today as well, just adding like depths and layers. So a lot to think about from this discussion about how other people see one of my favorite series. At the base for me, this is all about the characters. I mentioned earlier, you could put them in space, you could put them anywhere. And if you had these characters and this emotional resonance that I get with them, I'm going to fall in love with their stories and all their problems, all Freddy's issues. And I still love everything about them, this group of characters. And it's one of those where I'll never hear the name Francine again without thinking of this. Freddy's kind of the same way. Like these characters for me are going to be living forever in my life. And I'm just grateful to have it. But thank you all for being here and chatting about the series.
Thank you. Sleepy?
Well, I really love this discussion, and it's making me appreciate and enjoy this comic book a lot more. So I recommend to everybody to have someone to discuss a comic book like this with. And I am now, of course, I've only read a third of it, but I'm now kind of convinced that it's a monumental achievement. That doesn't mean I'm still on the edge of love and confusion, but I do think it's a monumental achievement. And very unique, I think, even though people compare it to Love and Rockets, I just think it's its own thing, very much so. And the question of pulp versus slice of life is now much more deeply buried in my head. And is it just a pulp novel with some slice of life leavened in, or the other way around? And more to come, I guess, on that. Another thing that was actually kind of pulpy was her art career. It was totally a fantasy. It had nothing to do with reality. I do life drawing all the time. I've been a local art critic at one point in my life, and none of that has anything to do with anything. At least maybe it's like that in Houston, but nothing like that ever happened in Portland.
Yeah, the art career, the inheritance, the billionaire kind of, like these are things that, and even the language that's used, like, I will make people in New York, line up for your paint. And like, who makes that promise, which impresario in the history of anything has done that outside of novels? So absolutely. Yeah.
Right. It's like point. Out of a movie rather than out of slice of life.
Although to be fair, here in Texas, we do talk big that way.
Well, there's that. I don't know enough about Texas.
Yeah, if I think about someone saying "gonna make you famous," I'm thinking Billy the Kid or something like that. No, yeah, I think so. I think that it is a pulp novel, and I'll just say that I think it is a monumental achievement. I think that all of the comparisons, but the comparisons I had in my head are absolutely unfair. But you've got to read it in order to understand that it's unfair. I can see where they came from. I loved reading this comic and seeing what to me was a mishmash of influences in storytelling, in pulp writing, in crime and noir and all of that stuff, but also in the art style. Because to me, I saw a very heavy influence of someone like Will Eisner, and a lot of the art felt very Eisner-like to me, and that was not what I was expecting. So I saw the Archie comics, but I saw Archie comics with Will Eisner and with some stuff that Scott McCloud and Alison Bechdel were, doing. And that, to me, was enough for me to keep going. And then as the story started boiling into its really pulpy parts of it, and then it was heartbreaking, and the relationships and the crime stuff being right next to each other, my reaction to this, which I might have said aloud to a couple of friends, and my wife also, was like, I can't believe that I haven't read this comic, in up to this point of time. It's just like, it's one of those things that there are some comics that you feel foolish for having sat on your shelves. And although it hasn't been sitting on my shelves for that long, it does make me feel like, I agree with you, Sleepy, that it feels like a monumental achievement, and it's like a landmark comic. And I feel like, as someone who's gone through and checklisted landmark comics at some point of time in their life, and like, I got to read all of these big famous landmark comics, I can't believe that I haven't, that it's taken me so long to get to this, but I'm hopefully going to make up for lost time now. And I hope it doesn't go off the rails and become bad, because I've really enjoyed what I've read so far. But I can see, I can see that, because I keep talking about it as a high wire act, as a tightrope act, I could see that it could very easily collapse. And Can I
kick you off your own live stream?
Well, I don't know. I've only read half a volume. I've only read one. But I will say that just to end, like what Sleepy started with, I think this massive book is one thing, but I think I would have preferred a table of contents. I think I would have preferred it being chapterized. This is a little intimidating, not knowing where you're going. And yeah, I think that if I had approached it, and also as I've been reading it and talking about it, this is what's happened to my spine. So maybe the paperback omnibus is not the way to go, and maybe seeking out the trades is the proper thing to do in more ways than one. But it is a series that I'm very, very impressed by. So yes, that's what we have for today. Thank you everyone thank you everyone for attending. Highland G, Blackpole, you guys have put this together. Gore and Sleepy, thank you so much for lending your expertise and your voice to this most thrilling and momentous occasion of my guest live stream dream has finally come true, and I honestly couldn't think of a better group of people to do it with. But we will, for those of you who are watching, who are here now or watching the recording later, we will be doing 2 more of these, because the idea is to have 3 live streams in talking about this. And the next one, we're going to get into heavy spoilers. We're going to be talking about specific things that we enjoyed and maybe didn't enjoy. So do keep a watch, and we'll announce which channel and where the next live stream will take place.
Thank you so much.
Sounds
This is
good.
great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening and a great weekend.
Really
Bye.
appreciate for being invited to
Adios.
this.
Thank you.